I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Professor Sami Bahlas. He's a professor of internal medicine and rheumatology in King Abdulaziz University, and he's a head of rheumatology unit in King Abdulaziz University Hospital. He will share with us his experience in morbidity and mortality in patients with systemic lupus. Please welcome Dr. Prof. Sami to the stage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for this excellent meeting, thanking Dr. Mohammed Amir, thanking Dr. Hanan Reyes. It's a very good, informative meeting. And I would like also to add to Dr. Hanan Reyes, whoever is the leader of the Saudi Society, we all are helpers and workers with you, inshallah. We are all in one boat. We are all in one direction. We all have seen during our training at all our levels, we have been exposed to patients with SLE in the emergency room with multi-system involvement. You have to use all the specialties. You need the ID, you need the nephrologist, you need the neurologist. Is it infection? Is it the lupus? Would you give stress dose steroids? Would you give pulse steroid? Would you reduce the steroids? We all have been through this. Today what I will do, I will go over some studies, just tell us about lupus in our community and lupus also in the community around us and international area. So we'll go over data in Saudi Arabia, other data from Kuwait, Egypt, and Yemen, and international data if I have time. This is Abha. It was chosen as the city for touristic destination in the Middle East in 2017. So the first study is done by Dr. Mansour al-Sumaili from Abha. Actually, it was a retrospective study. It was published in the Egyptian Journal of Medicine in 2018. And over 4 years, he collected 155 patients of lupus. 84 patients had no other illnesses. Hypertension was the commonest illness in these patients, and 12% had antiphospholipid syndrome. Admission were more in females, and if the patient has longer duration of illness, and if the patient has other comorbidities like diabetes or hypertension. Average number of admissions were 2. Average length of stay was 8 days, and 54 or half of patients were admitted only once. 12 patients died. This is the reasons of admission. I don't know if the pointer, but anyway, lupus nephritis flare was in 33%, infection in 16%, neuropsychiatric lupus in 6%. The cause of death in 12 patients, pulmonary hemorrhage, sepsis, pulmonary edema, pneumonia, hemolytic anemia, pancytopenia, renal failure. This is the fountain from Jeddah city. As we all know, Jeddah lies on the Red Sea, and the fountain was opened in 1980, and the height is around 1,000 feet. The second study is from Jeddah with Dr. Tom Heller. We published this study in lupus in 2007. So we had 93 patients over 6 years. We reviewed all the charts of lupus in King Abdulaziz University Hospital, and we had 93 patients. Most of the presentations were arthritis and fever, but 61% of patients had nephritis, more than half of patients. 12 patients had renal failure. They have 170 admissions. The admissions were grouped into renal causes, lupus causes. This is the presentation of patients. As we can see, renal was affected in around 61% of patients. Neuropsychiatric was in around 19% of patients. 8 patients died, and death was divided into early death or late death. Causes of early death was infection, pulmonary embolism, appendicitis. Late death, MI, leukemia, pneumonia, and other causes. Early death was associated with male sex, skin involvement, and younger age. Late death was associated with higher age. The Africans, they had worse disease. And this is the causes of admission. As we can see, lupus causes, renal causes, infections. This is another view of Jeddah. And by the way, Jeddah is a large city. We have around 3.5 million people living in Jeddah. This is Corniche. And this is another view of Corniche. And Jeddah is a large city, 5,500 kilometers square. This is another study that we did in King Abdulaziz University. We reviewed all the patients that were admitted in the medical ward who had lupus. Over 2 years, we had 60 patients, 95 admissions. The mean SLEDAI was 11.5. 11 patients were transferred to the ICU. 8 deaths. This is the characteristics of the patients. And as we can see, 20 patients were admitted for kidney biopsy. This is the cause of death. And as we can see, most of the patients died because of, or renal was involved in most of the cases. And active lupus is the cause here. This is the city of Riyadh. Is the largest city in Saudi Arabia, 6.5 million, around 6,000 kilometers square. And this study was done by a Reyes group and published in Lupus 2007. They concentrated on infections. But anyway, it was over 15 years. They had 199 patients, and all of them were Saudis. Renal involvement in 53% of patients, neuropsychiatric in 36. They concentrated on infection. They went over how many infections and what organism was there. And the most common organism was Staph aureus, and the commonest site of infection were skin, urinary tract, blood, lung, and genitals. 8 cases died. This study was done in Dammam, and this is the city of Dammam. And what I didn't know, that oil was initially discovered in Dammam. In around 1936, American geologist Max Steinke, he was looking for oil. He dug the first oil well, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, fifth, sixth, and there was no oil. And then he was instructed to go back to the States. But he insisted, and he believed that there is oil, and he told the people where to dig, and he left. And when he was in the ship going to the States, he was told that there was oil in the 7th oil well. So oil well number 7 was the first oil well to produce oil in Saudi Arabia. And in recognition for his efforts and for his persistence, Aramco has a hall named after his name. And this hall is for the senior workers. And to be a senior worker in Aramco is something big. It's not like medicine or rheumatology. So what they did in Dammam, Dr. Abed, he did a retrospective study over 4 years, and he collected 46 patients, As we can see, constitutional symptoms, most of the patients, arthralgia, arthritis, myalgia, AVN, in 4 patients. More than half has nephritis, hypertension in half of them, renal failure in 8%. We will go quickly. So this is a review again of all the studies, retrospective studies of outcome that was done in Saudi Arabia. As we can see, lupus is very aggressive here, as everywhere, and high mortality, high organ involvement. This is the city of Mecca, which is the holiest, the most holy city for Muslims. And by the way, in 1 hour, I can be, if there is no traffic, I can be inside Mecca from my house. Alhamdulillah, this is a good gift from God that we appreciate. And Mecca, this is a photo in Ramadan, during prayer in Ramadan. It's not a big city. It lies on 1,200 kilometers. And Medina is a smaller city, the second holiest city for Muslims. It lies 4 hours from Jeddah. This study was done in Riyadh and published in the Saudi Medical Journal in 2018. They reviewed class 2 lupus nephritis, and they had 32 patients. They gave them only the steroids in 78%, and 92% of these patients have gone into complete remission in 6 months. This is a big study done by Al-Arfaj and his group, in which he reviewed 624 SLE patients, and he found around half of them they had lupus nephritis, and end-stage renal disease was found in 9% of these patients, and survival did not differ to the lupus nephritis group, but he found that survival improved over time. And this is the extrarenal manifestations. As you can see, hematological was the commonest, then mucocutaneous, and the commonest class was class 4. This is remission or end-stage renal disease according to the group, and as we can see, class 4 has the highest end-stage renal disease, 9% or 10%. Variables that associate with end-stage renal disease was more with older age, hypertension, elevated serum creatinine on presentation, and class 3 and 4. These groups, they had more end-stage renal disease. This is Nagel fish. If you go to Jeddah, you have to try that. It's a bit expensive, but really you have to try that. This is a study that I published in Life Science Journal in 2014, in which I did echo for around 100 patients of lupus, and valvular abnormalities were detected in 38%, and pericardial effusion in 16%, and 19% had high pressure. This study, they did HRCT for 113 patients who had, this is published, this is done in Riyadh, actually, and it's a recent study. These patients had respiratory symptoms, and they did HRCT for them, and they found pleural effusion in half of patients, and they found atelectasis, pleural thickening, pulmonary hemorrhage, ground glass appearance. They have a lot of changes in the HRCT. This study, they looked into zoster, and they found that zoster affected around 5% of patients. This study was done in Mecca by Dr. Sahar and Walid Hussein, and they had a correlation between thrombocytopenia and disease activity. The lower the platelets, the more active disease. Now going to other studies. In lupus, 1998, in Kuwait, Dr. Khalid Al-Yarallah published this study in which he reviewed, this is the city of Kuwait, in which he reviewed over 5 years the patients of lupus, and he collected 108 patients, and this is their presentation. And as we can see, It's an aggressive disease. It has vasculitis in 10%, myositis, cardiac, pulmonary, renal in 19%. This study was done in Yemen and published in Sultan Qaboos University Journal in 2014. And Yemen, by the way, مساحتها تقريبا quarter Saudi space, and they have 32 million people. So it was done over 1 year only. They collected 149 patients, and they reviewed the patient's presentation according to the ANA positivity. So here, for example, positive ANA, they had renal involvement in 94%. If they have positive anti-double-stranded DNA, the renal involvement is 64%, serositis is 35%.
2 minutes, Prof.
How many minutes?
2 minutes.
And this study is done in Egypt, and they reviewed 770 SLE patients. And this is their presentation. And actually, death was in 33 patients. This is an international study, 46 years mortality, and they found that mortality improved. And the last slide, this study was done in Korea. It was published in February 2019, in which they reviewed the database of lupus in Korea, and they found that malignancy was common there. And actually, they suggested lupus patients should be screened for malignancy. And thank you.
Thank you so much.